Story number 1. A strange event that happened to me when I was home alone. First of all, I would like to say that this story did really happen, and I'm very interested in your opinions on what that might be. I was about 13-14 years old when that happened. It was the end of my spring holidays, and I was sitting in the living room playing online games on my laptop. It was something like 9-10 a.m. I was fully prepared for the first day of school after the spring holidays and was just playing to spend some time before going to the bus stop. An important thing that I should mention is that I was home alone. My cat was sleeping next to me, and I didn't have any other TVs or PCs turned on. It was very quiet. I was very calm and wasn't stressed at all. I'm saying this so you understand that this certainly wasn't a hallucination or anything like that. My parents would leave me home alone in our apartment all the time, so I was very comfortable and absolutely not scared like other kids. All of a sudden, I heard a strange sound in the hallway. It was very quiet and almost unnoticeable. It sounded like someone was walking barefoot, and because we had laminate flooring, it sounded like the foot was sort of sticking to the floor. I didn't really pay any attention to it because I thought that's probably a bird outside the window or maybe my neighbor. I can assure you, it wasn't any of these things. It was obvious that the sound was coming from the hallway. When you live in the same place for a long time, you are familiar with the sounds and the sources of these sounds. Therefore, it's quite easy to locate the direction of it. Unfortunately, that's not the end of my story. The sound was getting louder, much louder. First, I could feel the distinct footsteps. It no longer sounded like somebody was crawling barefoot. After that, it started to sound like someone was deliberately banging her foot against the floor to make it even louder. You know how after a long time of living together with your parents/relatives, you can tell from miles away who is walking. Every person sort of makes his own sound. When I heard that noise, I couldn't recognize anyone from my family, and that's the moment when I started panicking. First, I thought that someone broke into our apartment. I immediately grabbed my phone and started dialing an emergency number, when I suddenly realized that I didn't hear any sounds outside of walking. I didn't hear doors opening or windows smashing or anything else. I was trying to calm myself down, but my heart was beating so fast. I was about to faint. I called my mom, hysterically explaining the situation. She was trying to laugh it off, but then she realized that I wasn't joking. She advised me to call my grandmother and granddad, who lived very close to our apartment. Called them. Unfortunately, I had to wait some time for them to get there. It usually takes 5 to 10 minutes, but I swear these were the longest 5 to 10 minutes of my life. The sound did not stop. Whatever was walking before started running like crazy. One important thing to notice is that there's this part of the floor in the hallway that makes these squeaky noises. It is impossible to replicate. I'm saying this so you understand that this is certainly not a bird or another animal outside the apartment, and it is somewhat loud. So, when that entity was running from one corner to another, every few seconds, I could hear that thing running over that part of the floor, making this squeaky noise. Here's a picture I drew, so you get the idea. At this point, I knew that if that thing decided to enter the living room and say hi to me, I would have a heart attack. I decided to at least do something, so I tossed my sleeping cat in the doorway. By the way, the sounds did not wake him up. Unfortunately, that didn't do anything and the sound did not stop. I decided to call my mom again, hoping that the second would stop. When I was talking to my mom screaming and hysterically crying, I wasn't really paying attention to the sound and didn't notice when it stopped. The next thing I heard is my grandmother opening the door and entering the apartment. She had spare keys. We had a look around the apartment together to make sure that whatever was causing the sound wasn't hidden somewhere in the wardrobe or under the bed. We didn't find any broken windows, door locks, misplaced items, or anything important. We still live in the same place, and nothing like this happened to me or anyone else again. I've told this story to many people, and no one gave me a reasonable explanation. I'm very interested in your opinion, guys. Story number 2. Family left me alone at our creepy old house while they went on vacation. I must admit that I've never felt safe in my house. There's something strange about it. You know how you can tell when something is slightly off? Like you're a little anxious? It's almost like someone is watching you. It gets to me every time I sleep. I'm not sure what else to expect from a Connecticut farmhouse built in 1775. Anyways, last week my parents decided to take my two brothers on vacation without me. I had to ask why I was not included in this. Me, Mom, how come you're not taking me on vacation? My mom, well, you're working at your internship. Me, but I can take a week off. I just have to ask my boss. My mom, sorry, but the hotel is already only booked for 4 people. Next year you can come. I was furious, not only because they were going on vacation without me, but because I was afraid to stay alone in the house. I had to figure out how to take my mind off things while I was alone. Monday came around and they left for New Hampshire while I took off to go to work. The whole day I was thinking of things I could do. I only had to make it to Thursday and then I wouldn't be alone again. Clearly, I was stressing out because one of my coworkers passed by and said I looked a little pale. Later, I got back to the house and made myself some General Tso's chicken. I love to cook, so this calmed me down. After that, I figured I'd get to sleep early so I didn't have to spend that much time in the dark. I called my black lab over and fell asleep on the couch with her at my feet. Tuesday evening comes around and at this point I'm getting more comfortable because nothing strange happened last night. I was also thinking, I'm a 20-year-old man. I can't be afraid of the dark anymore. I stayed up a little later to browse Reddit and watching some YouTube videos. Around 10 o'clock, I called the dog over once again and went to sleep. Then I started dreaming that I was laying on the couch looking at the front stairway. A shadowy figure with faint red eyes appears around the corner and I see him at the top of the stairs. He starts floating down the stairs and coming towards the couch. He looks at me from 10 feet away and floats over the basement door. Imagine an old wooden colonial door with a fancy black metal handle, and then through it. Now I know this is a dream because I woke up and I wasn't even facing the front stairway. I saw that my dog got off the couch and was crying as if she wanted to go out. At this point, I was a little spooked because of the nightmare and I was alone at night. So I took a blanket, threw it over my head, and took my dog out to pee. She came running in wagging her tail and then ran over to the basement door to sniff it. Oh no, not the basement door. Come on, let's go back to sleep. We both got back on the couch and somehow went to sleep. Wednesday, I asked some of my coworkers if I could stay at their place because I was freaked out of being alone. I got all negative responses. Some told me I was being stupid and there are no such things as ghosts. Some said they didn't want it following me to their house. But no one would let me stay over their house. Evening rolls around and I'm creeped out from the night before. I ate leftovers and tried to go to bed before the sun even started setting. I took some melatonin and covered myself in so many layers of pillows and blankets that I could hardly breathe, because clearly evil spirits can't rip them off or go through them. But they can go through wooden basement doors. I wake up and it's nighttime. I check my phone. 1:26 a.m. Then I hear my dog whimpering. I look over and she's at the basement door again. Oh no, I think to myself, no, please stop crying. Of course, my dog does not stop crying, so I get up and go over to her. I tried to get her to come back to the couch, but she kept going back to the door. I love my dog too much to stand to see her crying. I still can't believe I did this, but I took my phone and was going to open the door for the dog, even when I was alone. And I had a dream that a shadow figure went in there. I remember this so clearly. I turned on the flashlight, shined it at the door and grabbed the cold, black, metal handle. My heart was beating so loud. I slowly opened the door and shined the flashlight into the basement. Phew, nothing there. As I'm about to close the door, the dog runs through my legs and down the basement stairs. I whistle to try to get the dog back up, but I just hear more whimpering. WTF? Now I have to go in there? I sat there for a brief second and tried to rationalize the situation. This must be all mental. I never actually saw a shadow man. It was just a dream. The dog might want to go down there because it was a humid summer night. It's cooler down there. Then again, we hardly ever go in the basement. It's only my house basement. I've been down there before. My brave or stupid soul went down the creaky wooden stairs and turned on the basement lights. I see the dog over in the crawl space looking in a dark stone room. Here's a picture from another time I was down there. I always wondered what was in there. As a kid, I wanted to explore around the house, so I'd go in the basement with my dad to set mouse traps. Every we went down there, I'd ask him what that was, and he just said, "Don't go over there." Now was not the time to see what was in there, but I had to. The dog wasn't responding. I start walking over to the dog and she bolts into the dark room. Hell no, I'm not going in there. You'll just have to sleep down here tonight. I turned around to leave and I stared the ripped insulation falling from the ceiling. I can't leave the dog in that mess, but I'm not going into that room. I'll just shine the light into the room. I shine my phone light into the room and I see the dog, but not the back wall. How could this happen? The basement isn't that big. Come on, let's go up. The dogs run out of the room. Thank God. I turn off my camera flashlight as the dog runs up the stairs. Then I hear a "hey" behind me. I literally jumped because I was supposed to be home alone. I turned around to see an old colonial woman with a white dress standing at the entrance of the dark stone room. She starts smiling and says to me, "I've been watching you since you were a kid. My husband built this house a long time ago. He's gone now, but I still keep the guests company." I was frozen in fear. There was no fight or flight for me. She continued speaking. "I'm not allowed out of the room in this form, so I hide in the shadows when I leave here." Slowly, she walked forward out of the room and faded into the shadowy figure I saw in my dream. That's when I started running up the basement stairs. I hear a muffled, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you," from the spirit. I ran out of the basement and the light goes out. At this point, I'm breathing so heavy I can't even think straight. I got in my car and drove to the hotel that's down my street and stayed there for the night. I emailed my boss telling him I needed Thursday off. Story number 3. Home alone. Let me start off by saying I am no writer, but I long-time lurker around these parts. I love a good scare, but only when it's exactly that. A good scare, not when it's real, yet so unreal, paralyzing, almost. I can't describe what I'm feeling, so here's what is happening. Sunday evening rolls around and all I want is to relax a bit. I'm fairly new to my current house, so things still aren't quite settled, and I'm not adjusted to all of the strange creaks and cracks of this place. It's just me and my dogs. My husband had to go out of the country for business, but it's been feeling like so much more than that today. I'm naturally paranoid, so I try not to entertain the ideas I get about being a young woman home alone. I just make sure my doors are locked and I go about my business. My dogs aren't much when it comes to guarding. My old girl is deaf and the other is afraid of his own shadow. Anyway, all I want to do is relax and take a bath. It's been a long time since I've been able to relax like this, and it feels surreal. It's the simple things. The tub takes its time to fill itself, but it eventually does. I'm soaking for what feels like a great amount of time when I start thinking, did I lock the door? I think the garage might be open. And right at that moment, I hear something from downstairs fall. Shit, it's probably the dogs. Calm down. I need to talk myself down so the anxiety doesn't get the best of me. I figured it's probably time to get out and dry off. I've had my bath and I don't really want to feel vulnerable right now, so I put some clothes on. This is where shit got too real for me. I'm wrapped in a towel going from the bathroom to my bedroom, and I hear what sounds like my dog's paws walking around in the hardwood floors downstairs. Awesome, right? Obviously nobody is down there, and it must have been one of the dogs to knock something over. Great, I thought. Walking into my bedroom, I see dog number 1 snoozing away. And around the corner from my bed comes dog number 2. What the hell? Immediately, I closed and locked my bedroom door. I'm frozen. What would mimic the sound of puppy paws like that? A few seconds pass. I'm still frozen and the sound of paws stops. Maybe I left my whole door open? A little raccoon or something came in? How did I manage to leave a whole door open? Now I hear scratching. I'm locked in my room and I don't know what to do. A few minutes pass and I haven't moved, nor have I heard anything else. I need to suck it up and figure out what is going on. Still in just a towel. I slowly open the door and make my way to the stairs. The sun went down. It's dark and I'm too afraid to move towards a light switch, so I just stand there for another minute. Finally, I got the light on. I make my way downstairs, and this isn't the relaxation I had in mind. But nothing seems out of the ordinary. A broom fell over. But how does that explain the sound of paws on the floor? It doesn't, but I'm trying not to think about it. Like I said, I'm usually overly paranoid anyway. I swear, though, I keep seeing things. Shadows. Maybe. I can't tell. I don't actually see anything, but I feel like there's always something there right in the corner of my eye. I can't deal with this shit. I just need some sleep. I know my mind is playing tricks on me. I make my way back upstairs, and I know both of my dogs are in the bedroom with me. The door is closed, locked, and I'm as far away from it as I could be. I still feel like I'm seeing strange shadows, but what can I do? Call the cops? Yes. Hello, officer. There's a shadow on my wall. I know I'm just fucking crazy. Only a few seconds pass after I lay down when one of my dogs seems more alerted than usual. He whimpers from what sounds like fear. He then goes to a slight growl. I don't hear anything. Now both dogs are up and growling, and now I'm nearly shitting myself because what is my deaf dog growling at? They're getting worked up now and I can't move. I'm hiding under my blankets, completely frozen, nearly crying. It's pitch black and I feel a weight on the other side of my bed, like somebody else had just climbed in. My dogs are calm now, but I refuse to move, eventually falling asleep. I wake up just a few hours later and check the time. It's only 10:15. I must have been having a nightmare because that's the only way I can explain my anxiety. A few minutes later, and I want to get up for some water when I see boot prints all over my floor. This has been my night so far, and I don't know what to make of anything. It doesn't make any sense. Story number 4. I found a terrifying TikTok while home alone on Halloween. Have a good night, sweetie. We'll be back after midnight. My mom said, don't forget we left extra candy in the basement in case you run out. I know. You told me like 6 times. Just go. Have fun. I'll be fine. They gave me one last worried look. As a 15-year-old, I had only been left home alone on rare occasions. My dad was giving me a distrustful sideways glance, as if he didn't believe in my ability to remember basic instructions. Reluctantly, they began to descend the front steps and walk towards the car wearing their couple's grease costumes. They were going to a Halloween party, which made what my dad said next slightly ironic. Okay, we're going. Remember, no parties, no girls, no drinking or drugs. Do lots of drugs. Have unprotected sex. Invite people over and get drunk. Okay, got it. Thanks. I shut the door behind them and was left alone. Mercifully, finally, peacefully alone. If you've ever been 15 years old, maybe you'll remember that wonderful feeling when your parents finally go out for the night and leave you alone to your own devices. It's magical. The sun had recently set and it was dark outside on the moonless night. Trick-or-treaters would be out soon, coming to the door in droves. It was my first night handing out candy, and I made sure to turn the porch light on so kids knew it was all right to come to the door. It was kind of exciting to be on this side of things for a change. I could eat as much candy as I wanted all night long while watching scary movies and playing video games. I had several horror flicks on my Netflix playlist ready to go. I tried to decide what to watch first: The Babysitter, Scary Movie, or The Ring. The night was still young, and I decided I didn't feel like committing to a movie just yet. So I sat down in my dad's comfortable faux leather recliner with a bowl of Halloween candy in my lap and pulled out my phone. I figured I'd watch a few TikToks, then pick a movie after that. I opened the app with one finger while nimbly unwrapping a Reese cup with my remaining digits. The video which popped up on my feed was dark, difficult to make out. It looked like the person recording it was in a forest. Then I saw concrete stairs and the familiar-looking wooden boards of a deck or a porch. I almost scrolled past it, but then noticed the deck looked familiar, as did the front door in the video. Ding dong, ding dong. I paused the clip. The Reese's cup remained uneaten in my hand. I put it up to my lips to take a bite, thinking the kids outside could wait a minute. Ding dong, ding dong. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong ding dong, ding 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 ding. I got up from my chair, the piece of candy still whole, and stalked angrily to the door. Damn kids. couldn't just wait a minute. They'd break the doorbell if they kept attacking it like that. Swinging open the door, ready to yell at the brats. I looked down to see there was absolutely nobody there. Glancing around, I saw there were no trick-or-treaters anywhere nearby. No other houses were decorated either. I noticed for the first time, mine was the only one, and it was pitch black outside now. I noticed the porch light had apparently burnt out within the last few minutes, since it had just been working when I saw my parents off for the night. I closed the door and walked back to the recliner, my heartbeat now ticking just a little faster in my chest. Sitting down, I felt like I couldn't relax. My muscles were tense and stiff. A floorboard creaked above me from the second floor, and I jumped, then told myself I was being foolish. It was probably just kids outside playing tricks. I leaned back in the recliner and tried to breathe. We had moved into the house that summer, and it still felt strange and new to me. I had to get used to its quirks, the wheezing, moaning noises it made in the dead of night, sounding ghostly and possessed. The whistling eaves and rattling shutters which sealed off the attic, sounding like bones shaking in the wind sometimes, or like muffled screams. Holding my phone in my hand again, I unpaused the TikTok I had been watching. It had been close to the end of the video. The camera panned upwards, and I saw the person raising a black-gloved finger up to press a doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong. The familiar sound rang out through my cell phone speakers. In the video, nobody came to the door. They began to press the bell again and again and again, faster and faster and faster. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong ding dong, ding 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 ding. It was too similar for me not to notice the coincidence. It sounded like what had happened at my own front door just moments before, although it was possible I was mistaken. Looking down at the bottom left of the screen, I saw it was a user who was unknown to me. The title of the video was Halloween Takeover. It had just been posted a couple minutes before. Another creaking noise could be heard above me, from the second floor, this time sounding more distinctly like footsteps bending the squeaky wooden floorboards. My heart began to pound faster and harder. I could feel it in my jugular and in my temple. My throat and mouth were dry, and I felt anxious and panicked. More and more with each passing second. With a trembling finger, I scrolled up on my TikTok feed, getting rid of the video and moving on to something else. Anything else. It had just been a coincidence. Nothing more. I refused to acknowledge the possibility of it being something more sinister. That was next to impossible. The following video was a live feed. I noticed. Had the previous one been as well? I wasn't sure. It seemed highly possible that it could have been, and I just hadn't noticed. As it played, I noticed the familiar look of the person recording, looking at their black-shoed feet and the shadowy grass. Then suddenly they were standing on the stone tile porch at someone's back door. Someone else's house. I hoped, holding my breath. But those stone tiles looked very familiar, just like the wooden deck in the previous video had. This time there was no doorbell, so they knocked with a heavy fist. Bang, 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 jumping up from my seat. I heard the sound coming from my back door a few moments before I heard it on the app, as if there was a slight delay as it traveled through the cellular network. There was no doubting it. They were at my back door. The same person who was recording the TikTok was outside my house. Feeling suddenly full of righteous indignation, I ran to the back door to give the asshole a piece of my mind. It was probably some punk kid from my school, trying to mess with me. I was pissed off they had gotten me so good. Swinging open the back door with a stinging retort ready on my lips, I looked outside into the night and saw, once again, there was nobody there. I stepped out in my bare feet, walking onto the grass and looking around for the person responsible. The door hung open behind me, and I paid no attention to it as I yelled out into the night. Hey, I know what you're doing. You don't scare me, asshole. Come and get me. That last statement was one I would come to regret. Going back inside, I closed the door and locked it behind me. From where I stood, the stairs to the basement were just to the right. The stairs to the main floor straight ahead. The darkness down to my right teased me with its unknown horrors and the possibilities of what lurked within it, drenched in blackness as it was. But I ignored it and went up to the main floor, shuddering and closing the basement door behind me as quickly as I possibly could, feeling as if something would grab my ankle with a cold hand if I lingered for too long. There was a flimsy steel chain lock on the door separating the main floor from the rear exit and from the cold dampness of the basement. We never used it, but this time I slotted it into position with my hands shaking badly. At least it would offer a modicum of security. But from what? That I still didn't know. It was beginning to occur to me that it wasn't necessarily a kid from my class doing this. Could be anyone. Could be a murderer. My knees buckled slightly as that thought crossed my mind. I went back to the living room and took a deep breath before sitting back down in the recliner, holding the phone in my hands. I debated calling my parents. I thought about how it would sound if I did. Hey Mom, I was on TikTok and I saw a scary video and they rang the doorbell in the video, and then our doorbell rang a second later and there was nobody there, and then somebody knocked at the back door and there was nobody there. It sounded delusional and paranoid. They would come home and she would say to my dad, "I guess you were right. He really wasn't ready to be home alone by himself. Maybe next year." There was no way I was going to let that happen. Whoever it was, I could handle them. Getting up, I went down the hall to my room to grab my baseball bat. As soon as I got there and had it in my hands, the lights went out. The entire house was suddenly completely dark, eerily quiet, lacking all machine noise. And of course, I had left my cell phone in the living room. With the bat in my hand, I started to feel my way along the wall, finding the doorway and going out of the room into the hallway. The entire house was quiet, dark and empty as far as I could tell. But then why did I keep hearing the soft squeak of footsteps above me, coming from the second floor? That decided it for me. I was going to call the police as soon as I got back to my phone, slowly moving through the blackened space. I felt for the edges of the walls until I was in the kitchen, then moved past the locked basement door, feeling a sense of disquiet as I did so, as if there was someone just on the other side. When I was right up against the basement door, I heard the sound of the knob turning and goosebumps ran up my spine and covered my entire body. They were inside the house. The flimsy chain would only hold back just the barest effort. Judging by the looks of it, I didn't have much time. Whoever was on the other side of that door was not a kid from my school. I had a very strong feeling about that. They sounded angry and insistent as they turned the door knob back and forth and began to hammer and bang on the door. It rattled and shook in its frame, running as fast as I could, no longer caring if I hurt myself at this point. I ducked out of the kitchen and over to my seat where I had left my phone. My intention was to grab it and call 911, but I didn't even get that chance. A loud crash echoed through the house and I heard the sound of footsteps on the second floor, clearly now, running towards the stairs that lead to the ground floor. There was more than one of them in the house. My phone was blinking from where it lay on the recliner's armrest. I ran over to it in the pitch-black darkness, bashing my shin against the leg of a dining chair on the way. I finally reached it and unlocked it, just as I heard the basement door break open with a loud bang. The only thing I could think to do at that moment was to turn on the flashlight. I needed to see what the hell I was dealing with. Luckily, I got it on quickly using a shortcut from the home screen and it turned on, casting the room in a harsh white light. Walking over to the broken door, I saw there was nobody behind it. No culprit who could have caused the damage. My phone dinged and I looked at the screen to see I had received a text message from someone. It was a link to a TikTok. "Sorry about your door," a voice was saying in the video. It sounded ghostly and ethereal. "Do you have any more candy?" The bag in the basement was mostly Tootsie Rolls and licorice. I hate licorice. My parents opened the door and found me shaking in the recliner. All the lights turned off, staring at my phone, watching that same video over and over again. It was our basement and our candy stash. "Really? You sat here all night with the lights off eating candy and watching TikTok on your phone?" my mom asked incredulously. "We're gonna have to talk about cutting back on your phone time. I would have thought you would at least give out candy to kids." Maybe watch a scary movie or something. My dad sounded a bit upset, but I was barely registering what he was saying. My mom was going down to the basement. I realized with a start. "Mom, don't go down there," I yelled, but it was too late. "Yep, he ate all the candy down here too. You are in so much trouble. Mister, I thought you didn't even like Tootsie Rolls." That was the night I learned that ghosts are real, and that once a year on Halloween they return to their earthly homes, to the places where they spent their fondest days. Our family had purchased the house from a couple who was downsizing after their kids passed away in a freak accident on a school trip. The son apparently loved TikTok and playing pranks on people. He also really loved candy, just not licorice, I guess. The daughter usually played upstairs in her room, was quiet and didn't cause any trouble. Greg and Alice were their names. I found out from my parents, who had found out from the neighbors. They found out some other details too. Other past owners of the house, some more controversial than others. It's not Greg and Alice who keep me up at night on Halloween, terrified to sleep. It's the other one, the one Greg told me about. He stays up in the attic. That's why it was boarded up. He whispered to me in the darkness, after my parents had gone to sleep. I didn't find out how scary he really was until I crossed the veil. I can see him up there, waiting. Just don't ever unlock those doors or open those blinds. All he needs is a little breathing room and he'll be out of there next Halloween. And you do not want to run into him. There's a reason he was locked up there to begin with. Halloween will be here again soon, in just a couple weeks. And my dad just decided to start renovations on the attic. The shutters are off for the first time in decades. The doors hanging wide open. He did it while I was at school. "We've got to let it air out," my dad told me with an unrecognizable grin, looking very much unlike himself. "We've got to let it breathe." Story number 5. I live alone in Alaska. The twisted man has been peeking in through my windows. A few years ago, I decided I needed a major life change. Everything seemed to be going downhill: my finances, my mental health, my life. I would go weeks without sleeping sometimes as the heavy traffic passed through the city streets down below. Every time I went outside, I saw more homeless people, more needles and crack pipes littering the ground, more muggings and assaults and overdoses and deaths. The city had become a wasteland, and I knew it was time to leave. I had no girlfriend, no wife, no kids. My parents had both died a few years prior, and I barely talked to my siblings anymore. I had nothing to tie me down to this place where I felt like I was dying inside a little more each day. That was when I sold nearly everything I owned, got in my car and drove up to Alaska to try starting anew. I bought a small cabin and a plot of land in the middle of its majestic mountains and dark, enchanting forest. In the winter, the northern lights would shine through like the eyes of God, sending out divine trails of light that danced through the sky in cosmic waves. And while the move did help give me some peace of mind, in the end, the source of all my problems had ultimately followed me thousands of miles into this endless wilderness. It would take me a long time to realize the cause of all this misery was myself. Because, as a wise man once said, "Wherever I go, there I am." Story number 6. When I was young, I had a home alone night, but mine wasn't funny. When I was a kid, well, a young teenager, I frequently spent my Saturday nights babysitting my siblings. As the eldest of 3, I assumed this responsibility with no pay nor thanks to speak of. It was simply expected of me, one of my contributions to the family. I babysat so frequently because, well, my parents needed it. They'd had marriage problems in the past, and their counselor told them they should go on a weekly date, revive the magic, rekindle the flame, all that good stuff. Yeah. It sucked to be robbed of a weekend evening, but it wasn't much of a burden. My parents were happier than they'd been in ages, and they both seemed genuinely excited for date night each week. I would have rather been doing other things, of course, but I'd seen my aunt and uncle go through a nasty divorce a few years back, and I desperately wanted my parents to stick together. And so it was that on the night of December 3rd, in the year 2006, I stood at the open front door of my secluded Colorado home, waving goodbye as my parents backed out of the icy driveway. "Drive safe," I called out, steam pouring from my mouth. I don't know if they heard me or not, wrapping my arms around my torso in response to the wintry mountain air. I entertained myself for a few brief moments by exhaling forcefully and watching my breath float away into nothing. And there was truly nothing around me, not a car or a creature in sight. It wasn't long before I grew bored and turned back into the warm house, nose tingling from the chill. Georgie and Kate were eating their dinner at the kitchen table. As I watched them, I couldn't help feeling like an only child. Georgie, 3 years my junior, was severely autistic and not talkative. He only spoke when he really wanted something, and only then in the simplest of words. Milk and sandwich was code for peanut butter and jelly with the crust cut off, which he was presently devouring. Kate, meanwhile, was still a baby, just shy of 2. The 9-year gap between them is glaring, but to this day, my parents swear to me Kate wasn't an accident. Kind of like back in high school, when I swore to them I had no idea how those magazines got under my mattress. But I digress. The kids finished dinner and I set them up with their entertainment for the night. Georgie in his room with the PlayStation 2, which was a hot commodity in those days, and Kate in her crib, in front of Sesame Street. Myself, I ignited the basement fireplace, dimmed the overheads, and curled up with a book by the light of our Christmas tree. God, that was a nice house. Not a day goes by that I don't miss it. I read, in perfect contentment, for nearly an hour. Night had fallen by then, and the room had become toasty. I was beginning to doze off when I heard Georgie's heavy footfalls descending the staircase. I sat upright and looked at him expectantly as he waddled into the room. "No more knocking," he said, brow furrowed in annoyance. I shook my head. "I'm not knocking," I said. "Is someone at the door?" Georgie just stared at me blankly. "Georgie," I said, more clearly this time. "Did someone knock on the door?" "No more knocking," he repeated. "Knocking on window, knocking on window." I stood up, now wide awake. "Georgie, is someone knocking on your window?" "No more," he replied simply. I stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank, I thought, but being alone in a house that big makes you a little jumpy. My mind started to race through the situation. I was a 13-year-old boy in a nice house on the hilly outskirts of a Colorado mountain town. The streets were engulfed in trees, and there were no homes within a quarter mile of my own. Our road saw next to no traffic, and the police station was a good 15 minutes away. It was probably my friends, I thought, but what if it wasn't? "Follow me," I told Georgie, hand trembling slightly. I turned the knob and glanced up the staircase. It was dark up there. The only light came from Kate's room. "Kate," I sprinted up the stairs to her room, where she remained happily perched in her crib, squawking with delight as Elmo fiddled with his crayons. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still, my heart thumped in my chest. "This is silly," I told myself. "Be a man." I made my way down the hall, to Georgie's room, and stood tentatively at its door, taking a deep breath. I gently pushed the door ajar, reaching for the light switch and thinking better of it, if this was the worst-case scenario. Then I didn't want our mystery intruder to know where in the house I was. The only light in the room came from Star Wars, Battlefront's game-paused screen. I listened for a moment, but heard nothing. I began to suspect that Georgie had simply imagined the knocking. Somewhat exasperatedly, I moved to the window and flicked up a blind to reveal nothing, just a landscape of freshly fallen snow backed by a quiet, lonely road. I watched the peaceful night, relieved, as the large flakes fell softly to the ground, my eyes trailing an individual fractal all the way to the footprints just beneath the window's frame. At first, I did not comprehend them. I just stared, transfixed, at the deep imprints in the snow. Shoes, a man's shoes. None of my friends wore the size. Of that I felt sure. I traced them backwards from the window to the sidewalk, from whence this intruder had evidently come. But where did they lead? It was a bright night. The moon shone proudly between the clouds. My eyes followed the steps across the front yard. But once they passed behind the giant pine, they disappeared. My heart leapt to my throat. Whoever had walked behind that tree was still there. In panic, I quickly backed away from the window. Georgie, sensing my fear, began to whimper. No, no, no. I muttered, desperate to keep him quiet. I flicked the television off and led Georgie out of the room. I quickly pulled Kate from her crib, powered her TV down as well, and carried her down the stairs in the blackness. Can't see, Georgie said, and Kate began to cry. I shushed her hurriedly as we descended. Once in the basement den, I unplugged the Christmas tree so that the only light in the room came from the embers of the dying fire. I sat Georgie down on the couch and settled Kate in his arms. Sit right here, I directed, staring into his eyes. Don't move. Do you understand? Do not move. I need to call the police. I would have called my parents, but this was 10 years ago, and they didn't have cell phones. So I took the stairs quickly and quietly, tiptoeing to the phone hanging from the wall of our living room. I picked up the phone and dialed 911, but I heard nothing. Silence. I slammed it on the receiver and picked it up again. Again, nothing. I think it was around this point that I started to cry. Couldn't help it. I was scared. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that the storm had killed the phone line, but there wasn't much of a storm. The snow was steady, sure, but there wasn't even a breeze. Certainly nothing that could have disabled our phone. Tentatively, I walked into Kate's room and peeked out the window. My first glance was toward the tree, of course, where the footprints stopped, but now they continued. Sometime while I was herding my siblings downstairs, whoever was behind the tree had moved. I followed the footsteps across my frozen front yard to a man, standing near the driveway. He was looking right at me. My breath stopped. I was frozen in place. This was not one of my friends. I had never seen this man before, but he was looking at me with an eerie blankness. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black slacks, a lone dark spot on a blanket of purest white. My eyes never left him, and his never left me. We stood still, silently staring, for what seemed like an eternity. My heart thrummed in my chest, and I felt nauseous for the first time, gazing into this man's eyes from afar. I began to consider the possibility of my death. I thought of my dad's brother, who was killed in an accident at age 11, forever 11, never growing up, frozen in time, in the memories of all who knew him, as a soul of eternal youth. The tears flowed freely once more. Please don't hurt us, I begged in a sobbing whisper. I knew he could not hear me, but I could not help myself. Finally, he broke eye contact with me and looked toward the heavens, toward the gently falling snow. He was saying something, but what? I could not hear. I stared, transfixed, as he pulled a handful of dark powder from his pocket. Then, still gazing upward, still muttering to himself, he flung the stuff at his feet. I desperately wanted to run, to get my siblings, but I thought that to let this man out of my sight would be unconscionably foolish. No better to keep an eye on him. The house was still locked. I had the upper hand, I felt. Besides, I could not bring myself to look away from the strange ritual unfolding before me. The man had removed his sweater and flung it carelessly to the ground behind him. He was no longer staring skyward, but his lips continued to move. I trained my eyes intently upon his mouth, trying with no success to read his words. When I saw something glint in the moonlight, it was a knife, a long, callous blade which he had removed from his other pocket. It bore dark stains already. From what? I covered my mouth to hush a scream as the man, still muttering to himself, ran the edge of the blade along his pale, distended stomach. A thin red line appeared along his abdomen, and blood of the deepest shade began to dribble from the wound. The streams trickled down his belly and fell ungracefully upon the black powder at his feet. The man stared skyward once more, face contorted in a gruesome smile. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and mucus ran freely from his nostrils. But he looked happy, beyond happy, elated. My stomach churned in revulsion. This man was in ecstasy. I watched, almost entranced by this bizarre unfolding. When the man's face changed suddenly, he looked directly at me once more, and his eyes appeared unhinged, still clutching the knife. He began to sprint directly at my window. I took one look at the weapon this man brandished and instinctively fled the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and was halfway down the stairs when I heard the window shatter. The man screamed, loudly, in pain. As I reached the basement, I locked the door behind me and ran to Georgie and Kate. "No more screaming," Georgie pleaded. "No more screaming," I agreed in hushed tones, stroking his hair in an effort to calm him down. Kate, meanwhile, seemed happy as a clam. I strained, listening intently. Is he inside the house? I still clung to some naive hope that he had injured himself on the glass and had retreated. Or perhaps he had been weakened by his self-inflicted wound. Finally, I heard it, the subtle but unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. He was indeed inside the house, and by the sound of it, was trying to be quiet. I silently guided Georgie and Kate into a storage closet and closed the door behind us, manipulating the handle to make as little noise as possible. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, listening to the ceiling creak threateningly above us. Then, I realized, I don't know why it took me so long, that we were not trapped. We still had a way out. I saw in my mind's eye a window well, in the bathroom down the hall, the only access our basement had to the outside world. Almost as if on cue, a frustrated scream echoed from above, followed by a tremendous crash. He had pulled something to the ground, perhaps the entertainment stand, or maybe the hutch. "He's here!" the man shrieked hysterically. "How dare you hide from him?" To this day, I don't know who he was talking about, but it was at that moment, the moment I heard him begin to descend the stairs, that I made my move, holding Kate in one arm and guiding Georgie with the other. We began our flight down the hallway. As we reached the bathroom, I stared fixedly at the window near the ceiling. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it. I flung the window open, stood on the toilet, and placed Kate gently in the shallow window well. Then I stepped off and told Georgie to get on. "Yucky gross, no standing on toilet," he said, looking embarrassed. I heard the man fumble with the locked handle at the base of the stairs. Time was running out. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it was the only way I could think of to get Georgie to cooperate. I smacked my brother roughly across the face and grabbed him by the shirt with both hands. "Georgie, get on the fucking toilet," I snarled at him, the first time I had ever said that word. He began to wail in pain and surprise, but he did step onto the toilet all the same. "Climb out the window," I directed in a harsh tone, and as he grabbed the ledge, I used all the strength I could muster to help push him up. Once, he almost slipped back down, but he was stronger than I thought he was, and managed to pull himself back. As I clambered out myself, I heard a raucous crash. The man had broken down the basement door. With one last hoist, I pulled my legs up through the window and shut it quietly behind me. As I helped my siblings out of the well, I heard one last anguished shout from the man, muffled through the pane of glass. "Why are you hiding from him? Cold!" screamed Georgie as I led him, barefoot, through the snowy grass in panic. I shushed him, but it was no use. He and Kate were both crying quite loudly by this point. My only hope was to get them as far away from the house as possible. I heard a distant crash from inside the house, and I quickened our pace. Feet numb, I sprinted through the yard to the sidewalk, and practically had to drag Georgie onto it. "Bathroom light on," he said pleadingly. He was obsessive about turning off lights and electronics before leaving, and he was correct. We had left the bathroom light on in our haste. I ignored him and rushed us down the frozen pavement. stepping on sharp rocks and sticks and not even comprehending it. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't know what we were headed toward. All I knew is what we were headed away from the snow was falling much harder by this point. I could already see it collecting in a pile on Kate's head. Her nose was beet red and dripping with snot. I needed to get her inside. But where? I looked ahead and saw a light. Off in the distance. The Garland's house. I'd said maybe a grand total of 6 words to Mr. and Mrs. Garland my entire life. But that was our one option. It was in their house that we would seek refuge. My house was now around the corner and out of sight. But I did not let up the pace until Georgie tripped on something and landed in a dark puddle. "Hey!" he screamed indignantly, looking back at his stumbling block. In the glow of the distant street light, I could see Georgie had fallen into blood. A dead man lay, face up and eyes open, on the sidewalk. Snow had fallen onto most of him, and he had been mostly invisible until Georgie's feet had connected with his midsection. I remembered the dark stain I had seen on our intruder's knife. "Come on," I pled, wrenching my eyes away from the grisly scene as I pulled Georgie to his feet. We ran for another 60 seconds, maybe, and finally reached the Garlands' front door. The window into their parlor was open and a fire was roaring. Mr. and Mrs. Garland Saturday drinking tea in cozy armchairs. I pounded ferociously on their door. They answered together. Utter bewilderment stamped on their faces. I handed Kate to Mrs. Garland and collapsed into tears. The police arrived at my home 15 minutes later and apprehended the man, unconscious, lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of our basement bathroom. They discovered him with a fractured skull, many deep lacerations from the window of Kate's room, and intestines partially protruding from the wound on his gut. He had slipped in his attempt to climb where we had climbed, hit his head, and knocked himself out. Apparently, he confessed under questioning that he was a member of a strange cult, a cult which, as far as anyone can tell, does not even exist. He claimed to have been taking part in a ritual which required the sacrifice of a pure soul, and my autistic brother had been his target that night. My parents have not shared with me all the details of what happened after that night, but as far as I know, our intruder is currently rotting in a cell. The man he killed, the man lying on the sidewalk, was a friend of my father who lived 2 streets over. He had called his wife on his cell phone not long before he died, informing her of a suspicious man dressed in black. Stalking around the neighborhood, my parents arrived home from their date to find police swarmed around the block and their home a crime scene. My father relocated at work, and we had moved across the Rockies to Salt Lake City just 2 weeks later. Kate is now a bratty middle schooler. As far as I'm concerned, she's perfect. Georgie, now 21, hasn't changed a bit, but he loses his mind if someone knocks on a window. As for me, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie now. I climb mountains with narrow trails and steep ridges. I go cave diving in places where you shouldn't. All, I think, in an attempt to recreate the fearful intensity of that one snowy night long ago. But it never works. The closest I come is when I'm alone, in my room, in the dead of night. Then, and then alone, is when the real fear sets in.